Russia, the absolute largest country on earth, is a mixture of nearly 200 nationalities and cultures that live in a land that's larger than the surface of the moon. To manage such a large territory, the country is divided into dozens of federal subjects. Today we'll talk about the only oblast in Russia that's designated as autonomous, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. Hello, and welcome to 7 Facts. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast is probably a weird and unexpected place to find in Russia, but it exists, I assure you. This federal subject is located in the far east of the country, not very far from North Korea as a matter of fact, which makes this even more confusing. The oblast is one of only 2 official Jewish territories in the world, the other one being Israel, of course. 176,000 people live here, and I'm sure you're thinking most of them are in fact Jews. Wrong. There are only 1,638 Jews living in this region that's supposed to primarily represent them. So, what's going on here? The idea of a Jewish region within the USSR began with Lenin. Although Judaism as a religion ran counter to the Bolshevik Party's policy of atheism, Vladimir Lenin wanted to appease minority groups to gain their support and provide examples of tolerance. In May 1928, the first groups of Jewish settlers from cities and villages of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia arrived in the region that became the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. This rarely visited province was finally established by Stalin as an attempt to boost the population of the Soviet Far East, as well as to appease Zionist movements within the USSR. It was also meant to show that, like other national groups in the Soviet Union, Russian Jews could also receive a territory in which to pursue cultural autonomy, in a socialist framework, of course. Unfortunately, this plan failed completely, and the Jewish Autonomous Oblast is anything but Jewish. Birobidzhan is the capital city of the oblast. An oblast is, by the way, a region or province in some Slavic or former Soviet countries. Birobidzhan was planned by the Swiss architect Hannes Meyer, a leading architect of the Bauhaus art school. In the 1930s, the Soviet government used the slogan, "To the Jewish homeland," to encourage Jewish workers to move to Birobidzhan. Amazingly, it worked and successfully convinced many Soviet Jews, as well as Jews from other countries, to move here. But despite this, there were some problems. Although Birobidzhan was meant to serve as a home for the Jewish population, the idea struggled to become a reality. Logistically and practically, settling Birobidzhan proved to be difficult. Due to inadequate infrastructure and weather conditions of the area, more than half the Jewish settlers who relocated to Birobidzhan after the initial settlement did not remain. Then Stalin happened. The purges he initiated also targeted Jews, and in the wake of World War II, nearly all Yiddish institutions of the city were liquidated. As a result, today there are only 1,500 of 75,000 people that declared themselves as Jewish ethnics in Birobidzhan. Before we get to the next fact, I'd like to ask you one thing. This video isn't sponsored, so perhaps you'd consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron. If you still enjoy my content, go visit my Patreon page and help this channel out. And with that said, let's go to fact number 4. Although today this weird idea is a complete failure, it didn't seem to be so in the beginning. Jewish people from all over the Union were encouraged to move here, with the authorities painting a pretty picture of a socialist utopia. By 1939, 16% of the population was Jewish, and their influence grew. Yiddish schools, theaters, and newspapers were established, and it seemed that this oblast would soon be Jewish. 9 years later, their numbers grew to about 50,000, or 25% of the entire population. But then, Stalin began his political purges, and Jews in the Soviet Union were heavily targeted. This turned the oblast into an unappealing place to live, as Jews now had a really hard time getting a job or even attend graduate school. Since then, their numbers constantly fell, and only about 1% of the people living here are today Jewish. Since the Jewish Autonomous Oblast is no longer Jewish and hasn't been one in a long time, there have been talks and attempts to dissolve the oblast altogether. Proposals to merge it with neighboring regions came in 2013, but surprisingly, the idea was rejected by the residents. There were even protests, both locally and by the Jewish community from all over Russia. They protested against such proposals since they would eliminate Jewish national autonomy in an area that still has the largest proportion of Jews of any Russian federal subject. It thus seems that this anomalous Jewish Autonomous Oblast is here to stay. Most of the times, we tend to associate Jewish ethnics with Judaism. It makes sense, right? But one of the stranger parts of this oblast history is that although it was meant as a Jewish statelet, religion had no future to Soviet authorities, and any religious rituals and holidays were thus frowned upon. The local museum contains Yiddish leaflets warning locals not to celebrate Passover, for instance. Local Yiddish newspapers contained no discussion of either Judaism or Israel. So, despite the promises of a bright future, those who settled here had to endure the exact same repressive policies as anywhere else in the Soviet Union. Despite the fact that today over 93% of the locals are Russians, the local authorities still hope to gain back at least some of their lost populations. If the local government gets its way, more Jews would soon move to the region, especially some of those who left in the early 1990s. In Birobidzhan, there is certainly an attempt to keep Yiddish and other elements of Jewish heritage alive, and the city still celebrates its Jewish heritage. Street signs use both Russian and Yiddish, and one school still offers Yiddish lessons. The oblast's proximity to China could provide to be an advantage, as a significant economic growth could indeed bring back lots of people. But whether this plan will work remains to be seen. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Leave your comments downstairs, and don't forget there's a Patreon page where you can support this channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye.